Welcome back to The Making of, hosted by Jack Pitts. This is a podcast where we talk with business owners and operators about the experiences that shaped how they build and lead. Today, I'm sitting down with Kris Carlson, who's the president and COO of the Fish Guys. Kris grew up in Champaign, Illinois, built his early career in sales and leadership at Reuters, and eventually made the jump into running a logistics-driven food business in Minneapolis. In our conversation, we talk about how early experiences, from sports to sales, shaped the way he leads, what it was like growing the Fish Guys through real uncertainty, and the lessons he's learned along the way. I'm super excited for this episode, and let's get into it. Hey, Mr. Carlson, thanks so much for agreeing to do The Making of. Really appreciate you coming on.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, I'm super excited. I know we chatted a couple last week, and really enjoyed learning about your story and your background. So I would love to kind of go all the way back. Kind of just interested where you grew up. What was your childhood like? Family, friends, and all of that. Just to kind of paint the picture of where you're from.
For sure. Yeah, no. So it's funny, I don't know if you know this or not, but I grew up in Champaign, Illinois, of all places. Um, that's where the University of Illinois is. I know you're familiar with that being from Riverside. It's less well known if you're where I live now in Minnesota, but in Illinois, people know it pretty well. But yeah, I grew up down in Champaign, Illinois, and uh, moved there. My family moved there from Indianapolis when I was really young, and went there through kindergarten all the way through till I went away to college. Grew up in Champaign around the university, so kind of an interesting place to grow up as a quote unquote townie to some extent. Um, but going to all the Illinois football and basketball games, and going to all the Illinois type events, and growing up being an Illini fan. So yeah, that's where I'm from.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. Both my parents went there actually, and I guess what did your parents do out there? Kind of what was it like growing up out there? I feel like not a lot of people experience living in those
In
tier
a
four
college
cities.
town,
Yeah,
yeah, it's kind of a unique upbringing growing up in a college town where the predominant industry is a university that had, I think at the time it still had 45,000 students, and you know in the summer the population of the town would go be cut in half, and then when the students would come back, it would change the whole complexion of the town. In high school it was really interesting because we would go to all the Illinois football tailgates and things like that, and get into a little bit of trouble around there. So it's kind of an interesting place to grow up in the middle of a cornfield, but then also around a Big Ten university. So I think to some extent that shaped a little bit of the way that I was. My dad was a physician in town. This is why he moved from Indianapolis, where he did his residency, and took over a orthopedic practice there. Um, and for a short period of time was even the team doctor for the football team. Um, so got to spend some time around that environment, which was pretty cool. Because sports, growing up was a super important part of my life. I grew up playing basketball and tennis were my two sports, and was very serious about them all the way through high school. And actually, I went to DePaul University, which is in Greencastle, Indiana. Actually, my original intent was to go there and play both sports, but I think the wear and tear on my body finally took me to the point where I was just like, I can't do this anymore. So after my freshman year, I kind of gave up on the sports dream. But I think just the fact that grew up in Champaign around the college sports, and I was an athlete, that was just a big part of my childhood. And I think that if you look at my career, which I know we're going to talk a little bit about, I think that type of experience of being a part of a team on a basketball team, and then being in an individual sport like tennis is a big part of my drive, and a lot of the things that I think throughout my career that helped me understand the importance of teamwork, communication, all those big things.
Definitely. That's super interesting. Just like you said, growing up there, getting into trouble with the college town and, what college kids get up to. And also, having your dad be, a prominent figure, like you said, team doctor for the football team. That must have been, such a blast, growing up. Was Illinois any good then? I know they were pretty good at football then, but must have
Yeah,
been awesome.
ironically, one of the people that I grew up with was the coach of Illinois' football team with his son. So there were two guys that were there. Mike White was the coach that took him to the Rose Bowl. I believe that was 1989 that Illinois went to the Rose Bowl. And I think they lost 45-9 to UCLA, so that was a big letdown. But that was, that was the best that Illinois did at football the whole time that I lived there. They were always really good at basketball,
Yeah.
but yeah, um, wait, what was your? Sorry, I lost track of your question again.
What was the question? I'm losing blank too. Yeah, I don't honestly know. We can keep going though.
Okay, okay,
That's the best part about the podcast, messing up a little. Um,
yeah.
and I would love to do. So I know you went to DePaul, but would love to hear. Did you have a first job while you were in Champaign? Like paper route. Did you like kind of that made you understand the value of money?
Oh yeah, that's what I was talking about. I was talking about just sports and how it kind of impacted the way that I was. But it's yeah, actually, ironically, my I was a pretty decent tennis player. I actually my first job was teaching tennis to kids at the Park District. So I was during the summers and things like that, I was playing tennis almost all morning, working out. You know playing with actually played with a lot of the guys that were on the Illinois tennis team when I was in high school, and actually had a opportunity to go and play tennis there when to college, but I still wanted to play both sports, and so Division III made a lot of sense for me because I that way I could potentially play both. I probably could have played tennis at Illinois, but if I would have tried to play basketball there, I probably would have been a perennial member of the practice squad. So um, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting, especially I feel like, anything D1 nowadays, like at least most athletes, it's like, hey, I only focused on one sport. I put everything into that. Super cool that, you first year in college, you're, doing both. I can't imagine what it was like. And I guess what kind of decided to, after, I know you mentioned your body was kind of breaking down doing two sports freshman year of college, like, how did you make that adjustment, your sophomore, junior year of like, hey, now I have this free time, like I feel like a lot of people can get into a lot of trouble. I know you studied communications there as well.
Yeah, I think it's it's a tough transition where you're so focused on that and you're kind of changing it. But I always knew that I wanted to be involved in business, and I was involved in a fraternity down at DePaul, which was a big part of my life, and so I kind of transitioned into that life and got really involved in kind of like different leadership roles within my fraternity there. Um, and I, spent a lot of time playing intramural sports as well. So they had a really, you know, uh, they had a really active intramural sports program there. So participated and played a lot of other sports that, played tennis and basketball, obviously intramurally, but then also played like touch football and all these other things. So had a lot of fun with that. So still, maintained, a lot of activity through that, but wasn't as focused as I was all the way through from, well, gosh, you get started with sports when you're so young, and all the way through high school. You do that for a long time.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I guess in college now you join the fraternity, you're doing intramurals. I know you said you're interested in business. I know you studied communications, but, did you have any idea of what you wanted to do, going right out of college?
No, I really didn't. And, when I was in the house, I think I was naturally attracted to things like, pledge trainer and, I was involved. I was a rush chairman. I was a social chairman. I was always on the executive board. And I always say that I learned a lot at DePaul, about, about people and how to study. And, obviously it was pretty strong school academically, but I learned as much outside of the classroom, in terms of how to deal with people and manage people and understand, how to get things done from all the different, things that I learned from being in the house. I think a lot of people, think of a fraternity as only being someplace where you go to party, but if you're really involved in it and you're involved with your peers, it's a great learning experience. And DePauw, at that point in time that I went there, it still was even though Illinois, actually, ironically, the University of Illinois is where the largest Greek system in the country was. DePauw University at that point in time had the largest percentage of fraternities and sororities. So I think almost 90% of the students were either in a fraternity or sorority when I was there as a freshman. So it was a big part of the community there. And, the houses were really well run, and they, in a sense, almost operated like a small business. We kind of operated our own house as if we were, kind of a small business. And, we obviously had accountability to the university, and, you know, we certainly got in our share of trouble, but we also learned how to get out of trouble. And we also had to, work with the faculty and things like that. So I think all those experiences like that really shaped a lot of the way that I was in business later on. And I think the culture at DePaul, I think, was really good for me in a lot of different ways.
Yeah. No, I think that's, a great experience, especially, being on the executive board. I, was involved in a fraternity as well, and having to, manage, 50 to 150 guys is, no easy task. So
Yeah.
being able to take those management skills
And
into the
if you
real
can
world.
find a way to still lead and still get along with everybody, that's a valuable lesson that I think a lot of people that aren't familiar with the Greek system and kind of associate it with it, a lot of bad things with it, don't know all the good things and all the great leaders that come out of it as a result of being able to get along with people and, being able to figure out ways if you can lead your peers, you can lead anyone.
100%. That's super insightful. And okay, so now you're in college, part of Greek life, getting ready to graduation. Like, where's your head at there? I know a lot of people, especially nowadays in college, it's like, I need to go pre-law, pre-med, be an investment banker. Obviously, I know you started out as an account manager at Reuters America. But like, what were you thinking there?
Yeah,
How did you,
Just so you know, it's Reuters.
how Reuters? I'm bad
But
at pronouncing stuff.
yeah, that's all right. So when I got out of college, um, at that point in time, most of the people from my fraternity and a lot of the people from DePaul were from Chicago, and I had a brother who was living in Chicago who was running his own business that was a headhunting business, similar to what you're doing right now. And so, um, my plan was always after I graduated to move to Chicago and figure it out. You know, um, I went up there, and this is going to be funny to you, and you know, uh, got an apartment in Lincoln Park, and just like all my other friends, and a lot of them were working in and around the Chicago Board of Trade or the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. Working on the floor as a runner, or working in the pits, or working upstairs. Um, and, I sat down with my brother and said, can you help me get a job? And he's just like, yeah, I'll tell you what. He's like, I'm gonna give you the newspaper. Can you imagine that? And he's like, I want you to go through all the one ads and circle a few things that look like they're of interest to you. And I sat down in his little conference room in his office for about an hour, and I came back and I'd circled two or three things, and he looked at me and he said, "Did you even look at this?" And I'm like, "What?" I'm like, "Yeah, I looked at it." And he's like, "No." He's like, and he circled like five things. He's like, "Call this one, this one, this one, and this one, and this one," and they were all like, entry level sales positions. Um, and one of the ones that he circled was a position with what was at that point in time Knight Ridder Financial, which was Knight Ridder newspapers, and they had a financial division, and it was for a telemarketing position to, sell all their services over the phone. And I didn't have any sales experience. I didn't know what I was doing, and I went and interviewed for it. And the during the interview, I was being interviewed by their director of marketing, and really nice lady. I still remember her name. Her name was Trish, and she was pregnant, and she pulled the age-old interview question on me, which cracked me up, and I was kind of prepared for it because I'd heard from some of my fraternity brothers that people like to ask this questions in the early 90s, and that was, pick out something in the room and sell it to me. um, and so she got through the interview. We had a really nice chat, and she pulled that question out on me at the very end. And I looked at her and I said, "Well, I'll tell you what." I said, I noticed that you're, pregnant, and I'm going to tell you why you should send your child when they of age to a liberal arts school like DePauw and all the things that I learned from that. And I kind of went through and explained all the, why it would be a great fit and why arts education was really valuable, and talked a lot of the things that we just talked about, which was, you know, um, y- you know, the value of the fraternity and the sorority system, and getting to know people and understanding people and academics and all that. And she absolutely loved it. And she went and got her boss and said, "You know what? You've made it through to the second round." So, that really, with that moment, and then she went and got the president of the division, and I sat down with him. His name was Jerry Becker. I still remember his name too, and we talked for 15 or 20 minutes, and he's just like, "You're hired. You start, next week." And it was a tough job market back then, so I was really, really happy to get the job. But they started me off in a telemarketing role where, I was literally just going down lists, and I had a quota. I had to make 100 cold calls a day. And I had to document them. I called Jim Smith and we talked about this and blah, 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 blah. And then I would have to write down, like, if I sold him something, and then I could calculate out my commissions on like a spreadsheet every day. And that was my life for like the first year, but I was happy, right? Had enough money to live in downtown Chicago with all my friends, and I was making money, and I was in control of my own destiny. And I learned a ton because I was actually selling, data and information. Back in that day, um, actual data was really, really difficult to get into things like charting programs to do, analysis on things like, relative strength indicators and, open, high, low, close charts, like basic stuff, volume, all these things that traders now and people on the internet can pull up in 2 seconds. That was like the very early days of that, of being able to get data into a program and do analysis and make trading decisions. So, I had to learn the markets. So I learned the commodity markets, I learned the equity markets, and I learned a lot about technical analysis and trading. Um, and so, that first job, I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I found something through that I think was really, really interesting, and all because, my brother happened to circle that ad in the newspaper of all things. How many people can say they got their first jobs out of the newspaper? Nobody anymore, that's for sure.
Yeah, no, that's amazing too. Just, having someone like your brother as well, where it's like, you just moved there. How do you get a job? If it weren't for him, who, was working in headhunting and, just kind of, being that older brother, I've done it, like, let me put you in the right direction. And also having those fraternity brothers that helped you with, hey, sell me this, pen, or sell me something in the room.
Yeah, that was the classic one back in the day, was sell me this pencil, right? That was
Yeah.
his, hers was sell me something in the room.
Yeah. No, I think that's awesome. And, would love to kind of hear just, like kind of like that, what did that sales grind, making 100 calls a day, like, how did that shape your confidence? And what did that
I got
grind teach you?
That's a great question. I think the biggest thing, in all honesty, was understand, and anybody that's done sales or cold calling will tell you, is that eliminating the fear of rejection, right? People are going to hang up on you. People are going to tell you no, and that's fine. That's part of the process. And as my sales career kind of grew from there, having that early experience where you're involved in a highly transactional process where um, you're going to get told no way more than you're told yes. You're going to talk to people who, you know, don't want to talk to you and want to do nothing more than get off the phone with you, and you have to figure out your pitch. You've got to figure out how to add value, and you've got to figure out really, really quickly how to get people to trust you. Otherwise, they're never going to buy anything from you. And so and you have to be able to build a relationship over a telephone. Um, which as you move from inside sales to outside sales, those are all really, really important attributes for how you learn how to be a good salesperson, which I tell a lot of the people that come in and work for us now that are getting into sales that understanding sales is the foundation of any business that you get involved in. You really, really should. I would highly recommend for anybody that doesn't know what they want to do to find an industry that they're interested in and go out and learn how to be a salesman in that space. Because I mean, that's partially the path that I did. I moved myself from the sales, you know, role into sales management and then ultimately onto the business side. And that's when I decided that I needed, more education. When I went back and got, an executive MBA just to understand the things that I didn't understand, to be able to move on to the next level. But then having that background and that experience from that point of view, was super valuable when you do get into school and you really know what you want to do at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's great. And, I've been super interested in, sales and, just like I said, getting over that fear of someone rejecting you and, just keep picking up the phone and dialing. Did you have any good stories from, the 90s of, crazy people going off on you or like great success stories? If you, any off the top of your head?
Oh man, I have so many. There's one in particular that I will never forget, and it's partially because of who the person was that was yelling at me. But after I moved out of inside sales into outside sales, you know, I quickly started off. Um, at Reuters. I moved from Knight Ridder to another company called Bridge Information Systems, and then from Bridge, got a job at Reuters, which to me was at that point in time, Reuters was the pinnacle of the industry. Bloomberg really hadn't started to, gain significant market share until well after I was at Reuters. But in the early days, Reuters had the distribution network. It had the global reach. It had the global news, element of it. And, it, I didn't, um, I didn't understand the power of the company that I was working at until much later because of just the reach that it had. But I ended up at Reuters and covered a couple of territories, and eventually, because I was successful and had done well, I ended up getting a great territory. And one of the accounts that I got was the biggest hedge funds in the world. And they were a customer of Reuters from the very beginning. And they started off as just like, a one-man band to some extent buying a data feed. But by the time I had taken over the account, and had a massive office in downtown Chicago with multiple real-time data feeds coming in from all over the world, and you know, um, ultra high latency was the game, and would spend as much money on computing power as he did if it gave him a millisecond of difference. And I was the account manager, and it wasn't anybody that you ever got in front of just as a salesperson. But without going into all the detail, I found myself in a meeting with him and my boss, and he was absolutely livid with us over a technology change that we had made that, was in fact affecting one of his trading strategies. And I can still envision me sitting in his conference room, looking across the table at him, and seeing the veins in his neck as he was yelling at me because he was so upset with me. And yeah, that was a moment that I'll absolutely never forget. I learned something from that too. We very calmly listened to his concerns, and just said, you know what, we can't solve this problem, right here in this room right now, but let me go back to the office and we're going to figure out a solution. And, we were able to, exchange emails with him and solve his problem and move on, and we were able to save the business. So that was the end of it. There's a lot more to that story, but it's every experience that you go through, whether it's somebody like, or just anybody at a client, is a learning experience for you in terms of like, how do you deal with customers.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. That's super interesting, and yeah, that's definitely a very memorable experience. And as long as you save the business, and it's
Hmm.
also kind of crazy to think, I feel like nowadays no one even like brings someone in their office and screams at you. It's all either going to be done over, Zoom or, email even. So having to go in person and, fix that problem must have been, like you said, just a great learning opportunity as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Cool. Cool. Awesome. So you're at Reuters, you're account manager for like a little under 7 years, moved into sales manager, kind of just working your way up through a big organization. How did kind of like your role evolve there, and like how did you grow inside such a big organization?
I mean, I think it's all about there's two aspects to it. One, you know, really know and understand your industry and what you're selling. And then the second part of it is make yourself indispensable by developing world-class relationships with your customers. And I think that that's how I provided value is that I, you know, became a trusted advisor to a lot of very, very big accounts, like the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, the Chicago Board of Trade, Citadel. I worked with a lot of the big banks in town. A lot of them have been, acquired and are not as, you know, big names anymore. But First Chicago was one of those back in the day. And I became the account manager for them. And, the management could see that not only did I have great relationships, but, my accounts, when say like people from New York or London would come to Chicago and want to see customers, and they would always come to me because I had the biggest customers and I could make one phone call and get a meeting, because I think that I had the respect of my customers and they knew that I wasn't just going to come and waste their time, that I was going to do something that would hopefully bring them value. And so really ultimately I parlayed that into um, sales management because of that. So I think if you know your business and you know your customer, that's the absolute key.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, I was going to tell you one other thing, Jack, is that I'll never forget when I was trying to transition from sales into sales management. I think I applied for the sales manager job 3 times before I actually got it. And I was up against, peers of mine who were just as focused as I was in terms of wanting to be successful, but they got the job before I did. So the next time that it opened up, I think after the second time that I didn't get it, I went to the boss at the time and I said, I just got to ask, like I've been working my butt off. I've been doing everything that I think I can do. I think I've turned in good numbers. Um, I, have great customer relationships. What do I need to do to make sure that I get this the next time that this job, becomes available? And my manager at that time said something to me that I'll never forget. And I still use it to this day when people come and ask me the same question. He says, "Well, it's really, really easy." And he's like, "You have to make yourself the obvious choice." And unfortunately, the last 2 times that you applied, you were not the obvious choice. So you have to figure out how do you become the obvious choice. And, so I kind of took that to heart and thought a lot about it. And the next time that it came about, I think that I made it super clear that I was the obvious choice to be the next leader in the office.
what was that, like that self-reflection where it's like, how do you become the obvious choice and to your
I think,
bosses, especially
I think
internal?
in that perspective is like, I think at the time of that my career, it was all about, you know, knowing your product, knowing the industry, and then the other side of it was knowing, the customer. But I think that there's another aspect that you need before you become a manager and that is just like leadership. What else can you do within the office that sets you apart from other people? So you're not just as focused on just you and your goals, but other people. And, I think that has everything to do with the way you carry yourself around the office, the way that you might also help people that were in your situation 5 or 6 years ago and giving them guidance and showing the managers that you could take somebody else underneath your wing and show them how to do what you do. um, Taking on more than you is more than just within your job description. So, you know, it's like a little, this is a dumb example, but you have a young salesperson who has a big, opportunity and, sit in on the meeting, even though it's not something you're going to be commissioned on, and help them close the deal or help them show them how you would actually take this forward. And that's what a good manager does, right? And so you by just exemplifying that you can be a manager before you're actually a manager, I think is what sets you apart, is making yourself the obvious choice.
Awesome. Yeah, that's super great. And like you said, being able to take a younger employee, like someone like myself, and like, this is how I would do it, or just showing them the ropes, because, the only way you can really learn is through experience. And, managing, you got to have that experience and the boots on the ground. So awesome. And so now you're a manager, and then you end up, early 2000, June 2000. So you're a manager for about 2 years, and then you get promoted to director. Would love to kind of just hear that kind of progression there.
I think that is just that's it's funny. There's different distinctions that I think are, big changes or bumps in your career, and then there are just title changes. So I think, the next thing that really was like the big step up for me was, moving from sales manager into, what they called at that point in time, director, or I think I became a major account manager, and that was kind of an interesting story, really. You know, we had a new executive come into Thomson Reuters who was really trying to make his mark and make some changes. And he came in, and he was from IBM and classically trained at IBM at that point in time, which, IBM probably did some of the most extensive training for their salespeople, of any company in the industry at that time. And they brought him in to kind of evaluate and make us into more of a world-class sales organization. And he came in and he spent about 6 months kind of touring around, the country and going into all the offices and meeting customers. And then he gathered together a group of us of about 13 kind of managers slash salespeople that he had kind of handpicked. And he said, the biggest problem that we have in the company right now is that we've turned all of our best salespeople into managers. And everybody was like, yeah, well, that's kind of true. And the reality of it is that what he was saying is that we took a lot of our best people out of the field and they were managing people, but they weren't spending as much time in front of customers. And so he restructured the organization so that a lot of the best sales managers went back into customer facing roles, but only took on like 5 accounts. And then he also put us through a very detailed kind of like IBM style sales training process that was run by the ex CFO of Rubbermaid. And we spent an entire year going through all kinds of sales training related to negotiation skills training, sales forecasting, learning how to become a trusted advisor. And we were given a whole curriculum that we had to go through. And I think we spent 1 month or 1 week a month in New York, going through training with him for an entire year. And then at the end of that time, they we had to go in front of a board, and the board was the CEO of Reuters America, the chief revenue officer for Reuters America. I think we might have had one person from London on the board, and we had to present what we learned in the class. And at the end, if you passed, you were certified, and you became a certified major account manager, uh, and you got a lot of stock. Um, and if you didn't pass, you basically were demoted to some extent. Um, and in my particular case, I passed and I got my stock. But the reason why I passed is that what I was able to exemplify, we had to go and do a presentation in front of the board and tell them what we had learned and how we had applied it. And I thought that the part that was really interesting was I think that I passed because I was able to show that I took what I learned and I actually turned it into something concrete, which was results. Um, and I think that, I think they passed about half of the 12 or 13 people that went through it. And for most of the ones that I talked to, that was ultimately what the people that passed and got the stock were the people that, could basically say like, well, I learned this from this class and I applied it within this account and and it turned into this sale, or I have this opportunity that's in the pipeline. And so that's really how I ended up, kind of going to the next level within Reuters, is really kind of proving myself through that program.
Awesome. Yeah, that's super interesting. And I guess like just interested in hearing, so you were like kind of sales director, the new executive comes in, you get curriculum. Were you like, and obviously they wanted to make you a major account manager. How'd you feel about that? Were you like, hey, I'm super excited, like another opportunity for me to learn? Or is it kind of just like, I'm a little annoyed? Like, I don't really know how I
No,
would feel.
I think it was actually the way that they went about it was super smart. Because they identified that they needed to get their best salespeople and get them back out in the field working with customers on the big relationships. And the carrot was big enough with the stock options that it was that it made sense, right? So nobody looked, and they also the people that they picked were all the best people around the company. So it was kind of an honor of distinction to be put into that group when that was a kind of a recognition that you are one of our best, one of our brightest people that we want to have go through this program. And they spent an awful lot of money on that training program between the stock options that they gave us and between the all the training that they put us through with somebody of like the CFO of Rubbermaid, who was our main instructor, which was pretty awesome because he even taught us things like how do you sell into the C-suite, which and he would teach us from the perspective of having been the CFO of Rubbermaid and the types of salespeople that he would buy things from or even take a meeting from because of the way that how much preparation that they had done in advance of the call, and also understanding that people in that position have a very short period of time to actually make an impact. And so you know, every hour of the day matters to them because if they don't make an impact and it isn't reflected in the share price, they're not going to be there for very long. So you really have to do your homework and you really have to like understand how to go and call on a C-level person before you walk in the door. Otherwise, you'll find yourself back out in the hallway in 15 minutes and have gotten absolutely nothing out of it, and you're never going to get in there again.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. That's super interesting, especially, how you're on, I saw it's the 10 major Midwest accounts that you're dealing with, and having that, hey, this is what you should do. This is how you interact with them. These are how you negotiate. And I guess one thing you've been touching on that I'm interested in hearing is just like, providing value to these customers. And I'm interested in like, hey, I'm providing value. Obviously, I work, I'm trying to sell you something, but also how do you develop that relationship aspect with them as well? Where it's like, I know your kids, I know your family, but also like, let me show you every product we can offer you and how we can help your business. Because that is definitely a super important thing to, managing relationships as well. And I'm still trying to figure that out right now for
That,
myself.
that's, I think what it is what we've just kind of talked about. That's the progression, right? Like if you look at the progression of what we just talked about, me going from inside sales to outside sales to sales management and then back into like a major account management role, which is a super important strategic role, and all the things that you learn through that entire process. That took years and years and years to learn, and then to know an industry inside and out. And I think what we're going to talk about next is my next role, which is like how all that played into my ability to become, the global head of agriculture for Thomson Reuters, which, was a super cool job. And that's when I decided that I needed to go back to school and supplement some of my kind of like learning from the streets, I guess you'd say, And the school of hard knocks is, I guess, would be a kind of people like to use that term. So how do you supplement that with a little bit of education to make you even more dangerous? Because, once I became the global head of agriculture, it was super clear to me from the first meeting that I went to in London, of what I didn't know. From all that experience. And so, and I ended up in that role for almost 10 years. And I think I was pretty successful at it and developed some really cool products and really helped grow that business, and even, did some acquisitions when I was in that role. So, it's a progression, Jack. I
Yeah.
think it's, if you were to take all those things, it's this plus this plus this plus this plus this that gets you to the point where when you walk into a room, you can immediately identify, um, you know, how you can add value. But prior to that, kind of like what I was hitting on, is that you learn that you really need to do your homework, just like you've done your homework before you met with me. You went on LinkedIn, obviously, and read my resume and came up with a list of questions, and, tried to identify that things were value. Any sales call, any meeting that you have to do, I still remember the CFO of Rubbermaid said that if you're going in for what you think is going to be a half-hour meeting, with the CFO of a company, you probably need to spend 5 hours preparing for that. You need to go in and read their annual report. You need to go in and read their 10Q. You need to go and read their letters to shareholders. You need to go to their website and read up as much as you can. You need to go and read news on them. And have a plan when you walk in the room, and understand, how you can add value to them, like I said, so that they are like, if you have something to sell to them, um, that you think is going to add value, you better have some pretty strong conviction about it, like I said, or you'll find yourself in the hallway pretty quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. No, definitely. I think that's great insight there. And would love I obviously you got your executive MBA from U Chicago in 2011 when you are, the global head of agriculture at Thomson Reuters. Would love to hear kind of like what, like you said, you went there to, supplement your learning from the streets. Like, well, what did you learn at the MBA? That's something that I've been considering right now. Um,
I think it's, there's obviously the whole, financial aspect to it in terms of understanding, financial reporting and balance sheets and all that good stuff. That's obviously important. Um, and, how to manage a P&L. I think the other part of it that I was really, because in my business role at Thomson Reuters, I was responsible for developing all the products that, ultimately were sold, that I used to sell, right? So, and then identifying new unique sources of content that a trader might find interesting, where they could find advantage. And so, one of the things that I just didn't know a lot about, having come from the sales side, is strategy, and, content development. And, was with just a little bit more information and knowledge, I was able to kind of, um, turn a lot of the things that I had learned early on in my career into how do I add value to a bigger problem, which is like, you know, ultimately, the product that goes on the desktop, and, for a trader, and workflow, and, content, and what provides value, and like understanding the business even to a greater degree, how a trader looks at it and how they find advantage, or a specific market, that kind of thing. So I think, that little bit of just like a little bit of context and understanding, kind of like at a really, really high level, helps you move into that space, I think.
Yeah. No, that's super insightful there. Cool. And obviously, I know kind of your next transition. So you were, the global head of agricultural, and then you ended up getting metals. How did that kind of come about? I know you did commodities. Um,
Yeah, that's funny. There was in any time in corporate America, there are ebbs and flows, right? So there are, um, uh, you know, good years and bad years, and there's consolidation and there's growth, and there are goals that are hit and there are goals that aren't, and ultimately those result in, you know, changes in staffing and headcount and things like that, and consolidation, and that was one of those periods where Reuters was in kind of like a not a hyper growth mode, but in kind of like a consolidation mode. And sometimes it's better to be in the right place than, or what's like, what do they say? It's better to be lucky than good sometimes. Being in the right place, as being a successful person that was doing a good job of running agriculture, and then the business ended up going through like a small consolidation, and they kind of added metals on to me. So all of a sudden, my portfolio in terms of the size of the business I was running went from, 150 million. I don't even remember the numbers anymore, but 150 million to 300 million, and then you've got twice as number of resources of people that are underneath you that are making everything happen, and you're ultimately in a situation where you're making even bigger or more decisions across a couple of verticals. You know, um, it is really what happened there, and that was short lived. It was interesting. My focus was always around agriculture, and I was really good at grains markets and cash markets and futures markets on the grain side. The metals market is what I learned have for the short period of time that I had was extremely complicated. Very specific to the London Metals Exchange and the way that things were done at the LME. I was by no means an expert in that space. I knew just enough about it to be dangerous, but yeah, my career as the head of metals and agriculture was short, and it probably was a good thing that it was, because there were a lot of people out there that knew a lot more about metals than I did, but there weren't as many people that knew as much about Reuters as I did at that point in time. So, I kind of there's like there's a difference, right? Like knowing the market as opposed to um, knowing how things work internally. So.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So you were the global head there for about a little under 2 years. And then, you were at Reuters as a whole for what, a little under 22 years? Is that right? Yeah, about 22.
Something like that, yeah. It's crazy, but and that all involved, multiple acquisitions, right? So,
Hmm.
at the end of the day, Reuters had acquired just about everybody that was smaller than them, and at the end of when I left, it was really, Reuters versus Bloomberg. So, that's really who we ended up battling with. And then there were smaller vendors that would kind of, you know, nip at your heels in specific verticals and things like that. But Reuters and Bloomberg were really the two big players in terms of desktop and data feed at that point in time.
Yeah, no, great time to be in, a business like that as well. Um, okay, so now, you make the transition to farm journal media. And,
Hmm.
like obviously you're probably making great money at Reuters, your family, you have a family, like, how'd you kind of make that next step?
I think I was really ready for a change to get out of, kind of very what I would consider to be corporate, America or corporate global, whatever you want to call it. I just wanted to get out of kind of the corporate world. Farm Journal at that point in time was a customer of Reuters in a way, and through some of my dealings, I got to know or got a chance to meet the CEO of Farm Journal, and he was I think at that point in his early 60s, and was looking towards retirement and was looking for a successor. And they were looking at transitioning from what was predominantly a kind of a print and magazine and kind of website. They had a couple of websites, but they really wanted to transition to a paid information business, kind of like what Reuters did. And so I think I was, from their perspective, again, the obvious choice, as they were looking for a successor to come in and take a look at what it was that they were doing, and see if there was an opportunity there to build a paid information business, with a lot of the data assets that they had. And I obviously understood their data. I understood their business. I didn't understand the magazine business very well, but that was the business they were trying to transition away from. So they hired me to come in and you know, kind of assess the business and see if there was an opportunity to build a paid information business. And, and to your point about, I was comfortable, my family was in Chicago. I was going to be able to stay in Chicago. And, at that point, at that age in your life, any company that's going to hire you away to do a role like that is generally going to offer you some sort of stock or, some sort of, incentive for you to make that change and also offer you a salary that's commensurate with what you're making in your current role. So, at that point, it was good timing for me because I was really ready to kind of move on and kind of, uh, you know, get out in kind of more of an entrepreneurial space and away from kind of the protection of a corporate environment. And with the equity, it seemed like a good opportunity at the time. So that's how that came about.
Yeah. No, I commend you for making that, that jump as well. Like you said, it's scary. You could definitely run off into the sunset at Reuters and, live a great career or have a great career. But, who knows if we'd be speaking here today, if that were the case. So,
Yeah. I,
uh,
I always say the role that I'm in now, I would have never been able to do if I hadn't have done all these things that we just talked about. Like
yeah,
all those things brought me different, fields of experience that have helped me to do what it is that I do now.
yeah,
And if I wouldn't have gone to Farm Journal after I went to Reuters and, some of the things that I learned while I was there from the team that was there, I wouldn't have been able to do that.
yeah,
Um, yeah, and I did another short stint in a very similar situation where I was hired by another CEO of a private equity firm out of London who had just bought a company called Ernerberry, which is the kind of the benchmark pricing provider for proteins, ironically, which is now what I do now. And I was kind of the interim president and CEO of Ernerberry Americas after they had made the acquisition to go in and kind of evaluate that business and help them make decisions about how they could, monetize their content better and, how do they build something that's more of a tool for traders and analysts and, people in the protein industry. So a little bit away from grains, but still in agriculture. So it made sense, right? It all kind of fit together. So I was there for just about a year and did a very similar thing there that I did at Farm Journal, which is like almost to some extent I played a little bit of a role like as a consultant, but also, I was still learning, right? I was still, it was my second chance of kind of going in as being brought in from the outside as the leader, which is hard because everybody's got you have a bullseye on you. Everybody's paying attention to everything that you do and everything that you say, and and how you decide to lead is the absolute key.
yeah, definitely, definitely. And I guess it must have been super hard. These are kind of these old legacy businesses and, trying to, come in from Reuters and, being at an established company and, change that culture, definitely, can rub people the wrong way, just given, we all
Yeah.
are creatures of habit.
Well, the irony of all three of those companies that I talked about that I worked for, they all had the same tagline, and that, Reuters was founded, I don't remember the days now, but like 18 something, and Farm Journal was the same. It was like 1877. They used to deliver, their newspaper out to, farmers in rural America via like the Pony Express or something like that. And Ernerberry was like the original benchmark pricing provider in New York City, where they were literally pricing the egg market. And I think they were founded around that same time. So all three of the businesses that I was involved in were old businesses that had been around forever, were considered the benchmark, whether it was news or data for whatever they did, and had a really, really kind of like impressive legacy and branding in the industry that they were in. So it was, all three of those things. Again, I wouldn't be able to do what I do now if I hadn't learned something from each one of those experiences that I had.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And now we can make sense, to transition into, making the leap to the Fish Guys where you're at currently. And would love for the audience kind of the little backstory. Obviously, Mike Higgins is the CEO there. Kind of how you, got reconnected with him. What kind of made you confident enough to, make the leap to the Fish Guys, and also if you want to kind of explain the Fish Guys to the audience, that'd be super helpful as well.
Sure. Yeah, no, I think I mentioned to you that ironically, Mike and I met our freshman year in high school back in Champaign, and we've been friends ever since. We originally were going to go to college together. We were both going to go to DePaul, but he ended up going to Kentucky and I went to DePaul, but we both moved to Chicago right after we graduated, and he was one of those people that worked on the floor of the Board of Trade in the soybean pit. Um, and that's I was upstairs, selling systems to traders, and so, he moved up to Minneapolis, 10 or 15 years before me. Ended up buying, kind of a small, seafood business that was kind of a distressed asset to some extent, and spent the better part of a decade, up to his ankles in fish guts, figuring out what the heck he just bought and how he was going to go to market with something and grow it and turn it into a business. And that's when he bought it, it was literally just a, seafood, wholesale distribution business, that sold mainly through broadliners. So they just did processing. Um, and through that time, and he was also a salesperson, and that sales experience served him well because he figured out that ultimately he was going to have to sell direct to restaurants and retailers, and cut out the middleman to be able to make a real go at a business like this and make it work. So he and I, ironically, when I was at Ernerberry, we're at the same seafood show. There's a huge seafood show every year in Boston. Um, and it's from people all over the world that come together and show all the different aspects of the seafood industry. And we ran into each other there. And he kind of pitched the idea. He knew I was at Ernerberry and said, hey, I'm getting ready to start, a, a meat division of my company, and I got some really, really good things going on. Would you ever consider, moving up here and helping me run this business? And at that point in time, I was in the process of thinking about whether to move to New Jersey, with my family, or, he kind of said, come to Minnesota. So, and being from the Midwest, and knowing somebody there, made it seem like a lot better opportunity. So, what the Fish Guys is now is, we're a, wholesale meat and seafood distributor. We process seafood and sell across everywhere across the upper Midwest from Omaha, Nebraska, all the way to Madison, Wisconsin. We have about 80 employees. Since I got here, we launched a meat division of our business where we have a USDA facility where we cut meat to spec for customers, restaurants and retailers. And then we also, in the last year or two, have added a gourmet division where, we are selling, everything from cheese and olive oil to spices and, salami, for charcuterie boards. Ultimately, the reason why we're in all those markets is that, we have about 20 trucks that go all over the upper Midwest, and we're hitting, over the course of a week, 750 restaurants and about 50 retailers. And our ultimate, metric that we track is to try and sell as much out of the back of that truck every stop that we drop. And you know, we both basically have come up with a set of products that, across all three of those categories, that a lot of people need. And then it's just a matter of, now that we're at that point right now where it's like, we've built it and we've got all the different things that a chef would need, from center of the plate protein, all the way to what they make, and or how they make it, all the things that they need to make it. And you know, that's as far as we're going to go with it. We're not going to be a US Foods or a Cisco, but we're a very specialized vendor. We don't sell anything cheap. We only sell the highest quality ingredients. So we kind of fit a niche in that marketplace. So if you're going to a really, really nice restaurant and you want a good steak, you're going to get it from us. You can go cheap, but eventually your customers are going to figure it out, right?
Yeah. No, that's super awesome, and just kind of the way you guys reconnected, and you kind of making the leap, moving your family to Minneapolis, and kind of helping stand up that meat division. Would love to hear kind of like what surprised you the most in the first year of being president and COO of the Fish Guys.
Well, I mean, first I was impressed. I was like, here's a friend of mine from high school that's bought and built a really, really nice business. Um, but my challenge was, how do we take it to the next level? How do we, double revenues again and continue to grow? And the thing that was super clear to both Mike, I mean, and one of the reasons why he brought me in was he also knew that I was good with technology because, part of my role at Thomson Reuters was implementing, trading floor systems and working with our engineers, to roll out hundreds of desktops to, a company like Cargill. And so I understood technology, I understood implementations, and the biggest need when I got to the Fish Guys was, redoing their ERP system. So from soup to nuts, everything from receivables to payables to, the sales input systems to how we manage back orders, how we fill orders. And so I spent the first 2.5 years that I was here picking out an ERP, which Mike had mostly already identified, but verified that it was the right choice for us, and then spent, 2.5 years going through all the processes and how things work here, and then implementing it in a way that was going to ultimately completely alter the way that we do business in the sense that, you know, eliminate paper almost 100% to the point where everything that we're bringing in the door is scanned in and everything that we're going out the door is scanned out and inventory is real time and we're gathering yields off of every piece of meat that we cut, whether it's meat or seafood, and putting a sticker on every box with a catch weight so that every customer knows exactly what they're getting. So there's just a ton. We could spend, Jack, we could spend in a 12-hour session just talking about all the work that we did to make that work. But at a high level, you know implementing a new ERP system in a customer in a business that you've just taken over, there's no better way to learn a business because as you're implementing it and rolling it out, you're figuring out all the things that could be done just a little bit better or a little bit more efficiently. Ultimately, that's how I help Mike kind of scale up the business in terms of, the different, meat, seafood, and gourmet that we now sell, but also just in terms of being able to reach all the customers that we reach on a daily basis, on a timely basis by having a really good, efficient system.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting, and that's super insightful, and would love to hear. So, you joined them in 2018, growing it for the first 2 years. Then, COVID happens. How did that kind of impact the Fish Guys? Obviously, you need restaurants, retail, you need people eating. Obviously, they're going
Yeah.
to eat, but how you guys navigated that, 2.5 years must have been crazy.
Well, yeah. I mean, we talked a lot about how I never could have done everything what I do now, I could have never done if I wouldn't have had all those experiences. And here was something that happened in my career, and a lot of people would say this. Nobody had ever dealt with anything like that before, and we were particularly exposed because 60% of our customers at that point in time were restaurants, and they were just calling us and telling us that they were shutting their doors. And at that point in time, at any given time, we can be sitting on millions of dollars worth of inventory, and it's not just like having bricks, it's stuff that spoils. So you've got to get rid of it. You've got to move it out. It's FIFO to the nth degree, right? Like, but when you have a lot of inventory and you don't have any place to sell it, and it's you know can spoil, you got to move fast. um we had the I didn't mention this earlier, but the other reason why I moved up here was I helped Mike start a e-commerce company. So we have a separate company that sells direct to consumer. So we were able to, you know, kind of pivot our business. And we had started that actually right before I moved up here. That's a whole nother story. But I had introduced Mike to a good friend of mine who was an e-commerce executive, and we kind of launched the business together. And I'm a owner in that business. And so we were fortunate enough that we had already built an e-commerce business. So a lot of people like us that were wholesalers were trying really, really quickly to pivot to e-commerce and go direct to consumer, but we were already there. So we were able to kind of transition a lot of our inventory and get it out of the door by shipping it direct to consumer. And the other part that I would say that is super important in our business is that we were diversified to some degree, in the sense that we were selling meat and seafood, but we also were selling to restaurants and retail. So when our restaurant business went down until they were able to figure out how to kind of do carry out, which that was a lot of restaurants had to pivot to that. Our retail business went you know kind of through the roof because people still had to eat, but they had to go to the grocery store and they were eating at home. And ultimately, they were buying a lot of seafood because you can't just eat chicken and meat all the time. So people were learning how to cook seafood at home. And so we were actually, to some extent, even selling some direct to consumer out of the back door of the fish guys, which we don't do. Like we're a wholesaler. We only sell to restaurants and retailers. But during that period, we pivoted a little bit and were able to move out a lot of inventory to people that were, wanting to buy wholesale for their home. Um, and then as the restaurants started to come back slowly, and then and then the e-com business just went through the roof. And so that really helped save us because we already had that in place. And so we got through the pandemic. It was a lot of work. It was a very stressful time. It was the type of thing where you get up every day and go in and, work all day and, and leave, late at night. But ultimately it was something that we had to do because if we wouldn't have, we would have lost the business. If we wouldn't have moved fast, if we wouldn't have pivoted, and if we weren't well diversified, we would have been in real trouble. And there were a lot of wholesalers like us that fell, and weren't able to pivot or weren't been able to save their business and went out of business. Whereas we really thrived because of that, because of the diversification and because we were quick and nimble. And I would also say that we were able to do a lot of it because of that ERP system that we put in. And fortunately, we had just finished rolling that out about a year and a half before COVID hit. And so we had the technology and we had the wherewithal to be able to move fast. If we were still operating on paper, we probably also would have been in trouble. So a lot of things were like in our favor, but I think it was like a lot of decisions had been made before COVID that kind of helped us, um, you know, adjust to what had happened to us. And now on the backside of it, we're stronger than ever because we diversified the business even more. And and then through the whole pandemic, we were able to maintain great relationships with all of our customers. And now we have a much stronger value proposition that we can offer to them across the board.
Yeah, that's awesome. And, talk about great timing on that e-commerce business and, getting that ERP in before COVID and, like you said,
Better lucky than good. I mean, but all
yeah,
that stuff is real stuff, right? That we you know intentionally did or plan. And again, that goes back to strategy, right? Like taking a step back and looking at your business and figuring out what your strategy was or is and how you're going to take the business forward. That once again, that's another piece of experience that I gained from Thomson Reuters on the uh, global business manager side, in terms of like, what is our strategy, where are we going, what are we doing, how do we grow this business. And um you know that's again, like I said, I couldn't do what I do now if I hadn't had all the different experiences that I had throughout my career.
yeah, yeah, definitely. And would love to hear, just obviously Mike's kind of CEO, your president, COO, like how does that decision making, like operations work, in a smaller business compared to at Reuters,
Well, there's
there's 10 million managers and whatnot.
Right. Well, we're very small, but I'd like to think we're really that we're smart. And I'm not saying like that we're smart guys. I'm just saying that we made some good decisions. Before I got here, Mike had identified, that he really needed to, um, improve the business, and he hooked up with some consultants who were big fans. And I don't know if you've ever read this book, but it's called Traction. And it's the entrepreneurial operating system. It's EOS is what it is. I think it's Gene Wickman, I think, is the author. And Mike had decided to implement Traction. So that was the other part of my job when I got here was to implement Traction. And Mike sent the book to me when I was still living out in New Jersey that I had to read before I got to Minnesota. And my other part of my job was to obviously to do the ERP. And Traction is an entrepreneurial operating system is what it stands for. And so we have a very specific structure that we work in, that we specifically were working on really, really closely. We did it by the book for the first, 4 or 5 years that we did it, which is, we had departmental meetings that are called L10 meetings. Um, we had, very specific roles in terms of what Mike's role as the CEO is his role as the visionary, which is ultimately like he's keeping an eye on, what's going on outside of the company and, kind of thinking a lot about strategy. And my job as president and CEO was it's called integrator, right? So everybody that's from the head of sales to the head of marketing to HR to the head of operations all report into me. I have meetings and one-on-ones with them on a weekly basis where we have very specific things that we do. One of them is that we identify problems. It's called IDS. We identify problems, we discuss them, and we solve them. We track them, and so we make sure that we close those things out super quickly. Um, and ultimately, a lot of this stuff is directly related to like communication, right? So, I always tell people that like the most important thing that we can do in a small business like this is like communicate, communicate, communicate. You cannot over communicate. Tell people what's going on. Make sure that everybody around you knows what's going on, and we are less likely to screw things up. So, anyway, we implemented Traction. We use Traction. It's a great book. I recommend it to anybody to read it. A lot of it is, as you're reading it, will come across as like, oh, that's just common sense. Well, but isn't that what a lot of, great business books are? It's like it's basically identifying for you, things that you think you might already know. But the thing I like about it is that it gives a very specific structure on how to run a small business, and it's a proven. It has a track record, right? Like people that have implemented Traction have had really good success with it. We still run Traction currently, and we still do all those meetings and all those one-on-ones, and there's a thing called rocks, which are like performance objectives. Um, and in every business that I've worked in, they've all been great companies, and they've had some element of Traction, kind of like in the way that they operate. But in particular, I think Traction is a really good kind of like system that you can run that is proven that it works.
Yeah, definitely. And especially, just being intentional about, what you guys are doing, how you're spending your time, and communicating efficiently and effectively, with the team, just to, allow everyone's day to be a lot easier and, not having to put out too many fires throughout the day. So that's
Yeah.
that's great.
Yep.
And we love, I guess, just hearing. So now it's post COVID, let's say 2022, 2023, expanding into the gourmet area, and getting more and more customers. Where are you guys kind of looking to take the company, in the next six
It's
to
it's
four
it,
to 8 months?
it's a really simple strategy from here on out is that we've spent, we want to take a breath now in terms of we're not starting any new, like I use the term divisions lightly. You can say divisions at a company like Thomson Reuters, but to say it in a small company like ours, it's kind of like it's maybe the only word to describe it. So we're not going to start any. We've fulfilled our strategy in terms of the ways that we're going to sell into our customer base. And we've spent a fair bit of money, obviously, building out building out the meat plant and all the infrastructure that we have in our main central distribution facility. We've invested a lot in equipment. We've basically fulfilled our strategy at this point. So our strategy for the next 2 to 3 years is to leverage what we've built, is kind of the theme that we're telling our team right now, which is that we spent a lot of time and money and resources to get us to the point where we can maximize what we're selling to our customers and provide, I mean, ultimately great service to our customers. I think we provide great service. The customers who like us absolutely love us because we do a good job day in and day out. And if we mess something up, we fix it and make it right. So we're really well positioned with everything that we've built, and we're just gonna try to maximize it and and sell as much as we possibly can, and continue to treat our customers as well as we possibly can. And I think that ultimately will set us up for the long haul for as long as we want to do this.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's great. And you guys put in a bunch of hard work to it. So just like I said, leveraging what you've built and continuing to, have that great, care and relationship with the customers and fulfilling on, all your promises and going beyond them as well. And would love to hear just like what is your favorite part about your job, now? Obviously you've worked your ass off for, like since
One
being
of
there.
the yeah, one of the well, first of all, I love the physical nature of it, right? So like when I was selling data and information, you never really get to touch it, right? And you certainly don't get to put it in your mouth and eat it. If you do, you're really weird. But the fact that I love meat and seafood and all the products that we sell. A lot of times I take them, I'll buy some here and take it home, and you cook it and you taste it, like that's really good, and have people over it and they enjoy it, and they're just like, that's the best lobster I ever had, or the best halibut I ever tasted, and I'll be like, yeah, that's the same stuff that we sell to the restaurants that you love. So I love the physical nature of it. There's another uh, principle within traction, which is that the first thing that it tells you to do is have the right people in the right seats, which is kind of evaluating the talent that you have and the people that you surround yourself with, that are hopefully as focused as you are in terms of understanding the market and the customer and that. And we have the thing I love most about what I do now is that I work with a small group of people, but awesome people, and they're all really, really good at what they do, and they're all serious, and you know they um, they want to do what's best for the company, and they recognize the fact that it's a privilege to work in a small family-owned business. And so they're as passionate about making it successful as we are because they want to continue to work here. We've got a lot of employees that have been here longer than me, 10, 15 years in some cases, and have grown their careers, within the fish guys, maybe started off in the warehouse and are now like a director of operations, or started off, working in the office as an assistant, and are now in sales, or so I just, and helping those people grow their careers and, support their families. And one of the things I always say is that I'm really happy about the fact that I think sometimes Mike and I need to take solace in the fact that, uh, you know, we support, 75 or 80 families. And I think that's rewarding. And the fact that I like almost all the people that I work with here on a daily basis, because I've got the right people in the right seats, is probably one of the things that I enjoy the most.
Yeah. No, I think that's amazing. And I know obviously you like grew up in Illinois and now you moved to Minnesota, what, 8 years ago or so, and like having that community um be your work and your coworkers as well is something that it's I'm living in New York City. It's definitely just an interesting thing to I hope to
Hmm.
have in my next job where it's like I'm making that community. I love the people I work with, so you're spending more time at work than at home usually. So that definitely is the cherry on top.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, and it's cool. I mean, kind of related to that, you talk about the community, like Mike and I are big parts of the communities that we sell into. we work with the Timberwolves and we work with a lot of the stadiums in town. But we also, the thing we love more than anything is when we have some the food scene in Minneapolis is amazing. A lot of people, unless they live here, you wouldn't really know. There is many great restaurants that are here as almost anywhere. James Beard Award-winning chefs, and there's nothing better than when we can go. And sometimes Mike and I will take, our wives and we'll go out to one of the great restaurants in town, and we'll be like, we can point at the menu and be like, "That's from us. That's from us. That's from us. That's from us. Don't order that. That's not from us." But like it's great to, and then the owners might come out and talk to us or the chef and thank us for everything that we do for them because quite frankly the food scene, I mean it, we like to think that we help make it better in terms of supporting these chefs to be as good as they possibly can be. So that's one of our goals too is bring in the best products and deliver it as fresh as possible and make sure that we help those people in their careers to achieve what it is that they want to do, which is to have a great restaurant or, a great retail store or whatever it is. So we take a lot of pride in that.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like, having a quality, fresh product is, you got to check that off the box. So super cool that you're able to contribute to, and like, I didn't even think about that. It's like, hey, that meat came from somewhere, and being like, hey, I did this, or, we distributed this meat is, just a really cool thing to say, because how many people, think about that. But it's, an amazing business you built.
Thank
Cool.
you.
Cool. So, last question that I always try to do on my podcast. It's inspired by Guy Raz. I was telling you a little bit about this, how I built this. And so obviously, you've built a great business. You were at Reuters, Thomson Reuters for a while, in the financial information in the 90s. You started an e-commerce business right before COVID that exploded. How much of, your success do you contribute to, luck, good timing, and, how much of it do you contribute to, hey, I'm putting in these 150 cold calls a day, working these 12 hours, going to London. How much do you contribute to the hard work and grind?
Um, you can never discount luck, right? And being in the right place at the right time. And there's certainly people that I've looked back at that I went to college with or high school with that have become really successful or, have done very well in their specific industry. And, to some extent, there's always a little bit of an aspect of right place, right time and luck. Um, but I think you have to go into everything eyes wide open, and everybody you talk to, you have to think of as an opportunity. Um, and you can always learn something from them. That's why I think it's so great that you're doing this podcast and, sharing a lot of this stuff because everybody's got a little bit of different story. And I think you just take, you've got to take pride and you've got to, kind of look out. I always tell my daughter sometimes, because everybody's now all about like their phones, right? And everybody's always looking down all the time. And they get sick and tired of me hearing it. They'll be riding in the car and I'll be like, look up, look out. The world is out in front of you. So I think that, the less luck aspect of it, yes, there's always that thing, but you also have to have your eyes wide open and your eyes up. Look up, look up. The world's in front of you. And to your point, that's always going to be there. But I think that ultimately it's the hard work that's the bigger thing, which is like you got to get up every day, you got to get in there, and you've got to try to be the best that you can be, and try to, you know, just constantly be learning something. The other thing I always used to say to my daughters before they would go to school in the morning is as they would walk out of the door, I would say the same thing: learn something. Just if you're gonna go to school, if you just learn one thing a day, that's all I ask. And I think you have to approach your work that way too, is that, each day that you go in, find a way to learn something, work hard, and, the combination hopefully of being in the right place at the right time in conjunction with the work is ultimately, what's going to determine your level of success.
Yeah, awesome. Perfect. Really appreciate that insight, and, really appreciate you coming on. I've had a great time.
Thanks, Jack. Appreciate it, man. Good to talk to you.
Great to talk to you as well. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Making of with Kris Carlson, who's the president and COO of The Fish Guys. If you enjoyed this conversation, please take a moment to like, share, and leave a 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts. It really helps the show reach more people. Really appreciate Kris for his time and really hope you found it insightful. Thanks again for listening and hope you guys have a great one. See you in the next one.